Hello, wonderfuls, and welcome to your very first notes. Let's go ahead, let's label our paper. So 7.4, solving quadratics by factoring. So I'd like you to go ahead and I'd like you to pretend that this is the whiteboard. You need to copy down everything that I write. And you also can go ahead, you can pause this video, you can replay any parts, anything that you need to. So we're going to actually go ahead and start off with kind of an essential question here. And my question is, how do I solve a quadratic equation? A quadratic equation. So, for example, if I had something like x squared plus 2x is equal to 48. And we want to know how are we going to go ahead and how can we figure out what x is equal to. So before we start with going ahead and solving, we need to go over one property. And this is the zero product property. And the zero product property states that if the product of two real numbers is 0, then at least one of the numbers must be 0. And if we're going to go ahead and say this in algebra terms, if we're saying A times B is equal to 0, we're either going to say that A has to be 0, right? Because 0 times any number is equal to 0. Or B has to be equal to 0. Because any number times 0, again, is equal to 0. And so we're going to go ahead and we're going to use this zero product property while we are solving these. Okay, so I'm going to actually go back to my original problem here. And I am going to go back, I'm going to scroll this up here. And I am going to state, for example 1, I have x squared plus 2x is equal to 48. Now, in order to use the zero product property, we have to be able to go ahead and set your equation equal to 0. So we need to go ahead and we need to make sure that that is definitely equal. And how I'm going to do that is I'm actually going to move everything over to the left side of my equation. So now I have x squared plus 2x minus 48 is equal to 0. So after I set equal to 0, we have been factoring maniacs. And this is why we were going ahead and we were factoring so much, is because we need to be able to solve these quadratics. So you need to factor completely. Make sure that it is complete. So when I'm factoring this, I know that the two factors that are going to multiply to negative 48 are going to be I'm going to have x minus 6 on this side and x plus 8 on that side. If you need some help with some factoring, make sure that you're reviewing that. And this is where that zero product property comes in so handy, because we're either going to say, hey, this part has to be equal to 0. So whatever this is equals to 0, or this part is going to be equal to 0. So if I'm going back to my steps here, I'm going to, step number 3 is set each linear factor equal to 0. So I'm saying that, okay, either x minus 6 has to be equal to 0, or x plus 8 is equal to 0. Those are my two options there. And then we're going to go ahead and we are going to solve each linear factor. So I'm going to add 6 to this side. I get that x is equal to 6, or I'm going to subtract 8. X is equal to a negative 8. And so in my head, I of course can plug it into this equation up here, and I have x minus 6, that's 0. So 0 times 14 is going to be equal to 0, and then I could, over here, I can set this one. If I have a negative 8, I have a negative 14 times 0 is equal to 0. So that works. So you always want to make sure that you are checking your work. And it's a good idea to check your work in your original equation, which I'm going to go ahead and do right now. So I know that I could have 6 squared plus 2 times 6 is equal to 48. I have 36 plus 12. Hey, this works out nicely. So that's a good one. And then I also have negative 8 squared plus 2 times negative 8. This is 64 minus 16, and this is also works out. So actually what happens is that you end up having 2 answers. And the reason that you have 2 answers is because it is a quadratic, meaning that it is a degree of 2, meaning that you should have 2 answers for this. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to move on to example 2. And I have 2x squared minus 8x is equal to 0. Now, first step is to set equal to 0. That's already done for us. We don't need to move anything around. Second step is to factor. And I have a GCF for this one. That's how I'm going to be able to factor this. And my GCF is 2x. And I'm left with x minus 4. Okay, now I have 2 linear factors. I have this guy. And then I also have this guy. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set each of them equal to 0. So I have 2x equals 0, or x minus 4 is equal to 0. Solve each one. Add 4 on this side. And x is equal to 4. These are my 2 final answers. I'm going to go ahead and boxing them. If you want to go back, you can check your work mentally. You have 0 minus 0, that works. And then you have, your other one works as well. So my last example, because we're running out of time a little bit, is that I'm going to say 6x squared plus 7 is equal to 17x. Now, the reason I put this one up here is because this always seems to trick us up a little bit. We need to remember that standard form. And that standard form, when you set this equal to 0, you need to remember to put your highest exponent first and then go down in terms of your exponent. So this one actually ends up being 6x squared minus 17x plus 7 equals 0. So I set equal to 0. Now I need to go ahead and factor. And for those of you that would like to, feel free to set up that diamond. I know that I'm going to have a 42 at the top, negative 17 at the bottom. That leaves me with, let's see, negative 14, negative 3. So when I set up my binomials, I know that the bottom one is going to be a negative 14x. This one's going to be a negative 3x. So I am looking at factors of 6x squared. This is going to be a 2x times a negative 7 and a 3x times a negative 1. Okay, so I factored. It's set equal to 0. Now I actually have two linear factors, this guy, and we'll keep with the blue, this guy over here. So I'm able to set them both equal to 0. 2x minus 1 equals 0. 3x minus 7 equals 0. And I can solve both of these. 2x is equal to 1. Divide by 2. X is equal to 1/2. There's one of my answers. And then I add 7. 3x is equal to 7. Divide by 3. And my other answer is 7/3.